Thank you so much for talking to us once again. Last time we met in Riga at the Eastern Partnership Summit.
Good evening.
Good evening, and we were talking exactly about the macro-financial assistance, 1.8 billion euros granted to Ukraine. And I was actually going to ask you about the fate of those two tranches. Are they put on hold? What is their fate, and what are the conditions for Ukraine to get this help?
Well, we are now in discussions with Ukrainian government as regards second tranche of our macro-financial assistance program, so the next 600 million euros. And if the outstanding conditions are fulfilled, it's realistic to disburse this tranche still this year.
Mm-hmm. And what are exactly the conditions?
I would say probably the most important outstanding element is adoption in a final reading of the law on energy regulator.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you see that coming from the Ukrainian side?
From my discussions with government representatives, I'm just from a meeting with Finance Minister Daniluk. We see that there is a willingness and readiness from the government side to move forward, that also discussions in Parliament are advancing, so that there is, I would say, reasonable expectation that also this work will be finalized soon.
Mm-hmm. As you were saying last time, one of the conditions, or let's say several conditions, but they were in the sphere, was about Ukraine starting some real serious anti-corruption activity. And you were talking about, it was actually written in the memorandum, about the kickoff of the bureau, which actually happened, but we have all witnessed that this newly formed institution came into open conflict with the General Prosecutor's Office. So my question to you is, how do you see the future of this newly formed institution in this situation and in this scheme in Ukraine?
Yeah, indeed. The setting up of Anti-Corruption Bureau was one of important conditions, which was also mentioned in a memorandum of understanding. And we know that the bureau has been set up. We had been just discussing also the need to provide adequate financing and resourcing for the work of this bureau, which is also being done. Of course, it's important to safeguard the independence and possibility for active work of the bureau. So, as I understand, there had been some tensions also with some other law enforcement institutions, but as I understand, there's also work being done to calm down those tensions and to ensure that institutions work according to their mandates and, so to say, complement each other and not conflict each other.
Mm-hmm. So you see some work which is in progress probably being done to calm down the situation, to calm down the tension?
Well, indeed, we see that this bureau has been set up. We see that also the necessary resources are being provided for the work of the bureau, and we see that also some of the conflicts which are there, work is being done on resolving of those conflicts.
Mm-hmm. Another commitment from the Ukrainian side, and it was actually a commitment in the framework of the IMF program, was e-declarations for the statesman. And we have seen actually that this commitment was compromised by a number of steps. And my question to you is, could that be counted as a real reform, as a real step with all that happened around this implementation of e-declarations? Is that a real reform? Is that something that could be, I don't know, how is it seen in the European Commission? As a real commitment, as a serious step?
Well, indeed, there had been some back and forth as regards those e-declarations, but we also see that they are finally in place, that the system is verified, so that it's also legally binding. At this stage, I would say it's important not to water down what currently has been done, because we're also following some discussions in parliaments and some new ideas or amendments which are being discussed. So at this stage, I think it's important to let the new system work, to implement what has been legislated, and not start watering it down immediately.
I also wanted to ask, like, maybe a more general question about the progress of Ukraine in the framework of those conditionalities put down by the European Union and also in the framework of the IMF. How do you assess Ukraine's progress?
Well, indeed, if we look at the overall progress, we think that progress has been indeed quite remarkable. In terms of macroeconomic stabilization, Ukraine has come out of the recession, and this year is expected to be back to the economic growth, somewhere between 1 and 2% growth. Next year, growth is expected to strengthen, maybe around 3%. Financial stability is ensured, inflation is clearly going down, budget deficit is going down. Ukraine is meeting its budget deficit targets as regards last year. It appears to be on track to meet this year's target. Also, next year's budget is being prepared in line with agreed budgetary targets.
Just right now,
so,
actually.
Exactly. So, and also in terms of structural reforms, government, despite very complicated security situation which Ukraine is facing, has been engaging and has been delivering on very ambitious structural reforms agenda. So this is something which needs to be acknowledged. I think it also has been acknowledged. IMF just decided to come with the next disbursement. We are discussing on the next disbursement of our macrofinancial assistance program. So lots of progress has been achieved. Of course, work is not over. More needs to be done, especially in the field of anti-corruption, in the field of judiciary, in improvement of tax collection. So there are a number of areas where, of course, lots of further work is needed.
Last time you were talking that recession in Ukraine was actually the reason of the recession in the first place is the security factor. But with the possible truce coming, with the possible ceasefire, another attempt, as you probably heard after the visit of Steinmeier and Hromadske. So my question is, what do you think Ukrainian government should do apart from, facing the risks, the security risks in terms of economy and growing economy? What Ukraine should do next to tackle the risk of recession?
Okay, first of all, it's worth noting that Ukraine is already back to the economic growth. Well, security issues still remain a major concern, and that's of course something which needs to be dealt with, including with the support of international partners. As regards other areas, recently also European Business Association in Ukraine has made some survey what are the main obstacles for doing business in Ukraine and for investing in Ukraine. And among some of the main elements were questions of the rule of law, predictability of legal proceedings, of judiciary system, and broader speaking of anti-corruption issues. So this emerged as main issues from European businesses' perspective as obstacles to investing in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That will be probably my last question before another one. How do you generally feel about the ceasefire, about what we have heard yesterday from the French and the German minister, and also, which is surprisingly new, was for many from the leaders of the so-called DNR that the ceasefire is coming. But we also witnessed some shellings and firings this night. How do you feel in general about this perspective, about Minsk being implemented?
We currently see no alternative in a sense that we need to implement Minsk. But of course we see that it's problematic. Not always those truces are holding. There are many violations. So more effort, more diplomatic effort is needed to actually deal with this situation. We are following from European Union side the situation very closely and are trying to facilitate that there is a real truce and that indeed it's something which is fully observed by both sides.
About the elections in Crimea, Russian elections in Crimea. There was a statement from the European Commission that the European Commission will not acknowledge the results of the elections in occupied Crimea. But doesn't that mean that the legitimacy of the Russian Duma is undermined?
Well, it's a very clear policy of European Union of non-recognition of annexation of Crimea and Sevastopol into Russia. We consider this annexation illegal and we build our positions, including on elections in Crimea, based on this policy.
Yes, but doesn't that mean that the Russian Duma could be considered as illegitimate in terms of international law?
Well, in our case, we are concentrating on this non-recognition policy as regards Crimea.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
talking
you.
to us.